Classroom of the Elite Volume 11. This volume had the long-awaited match between Ayanokoji and Sakayanagi, where I had previously thought we, the readers, would finally see Ayanokoji go all out. But alas, I was too naive to even think that the author would display the full abilities of Ayanokoji this early in the novel. Let's start this review like all the others by, firstly, talking about the prologue. In all volumes we see a particular character's monologue at the beginning, and more often than not it hints on the character's inner turmoil or future development. In this volume we see the monologue of Sakayanagi Arisu, her dreaming back to the day she had first met Ayanokoji. The most important detail about the White Room we gained from this monologue was that only the not gifted children were put into the White Room. That means Ayanokoji was not born gifted, and I know there has been many arguments about whether he was born genius or not, but I just want to present my opinion on the matter. Here are the facts. In the previous volumes Ayanokoji once mentioned to Sakura that as a kid he used to cry a lot in front of people. Now I know he may just be talking about him as an infant or 2-year-old, since he has always been observed since his birth. But I beg to differ. In his fight against Ryuuen he spoke about fear. When Ryuuen asked him whether he did not feel fear, Ayanokoji thought to himself that he did feel fear in the past. Terrible fear of failing, hence perhaps crying, but then he was made to realize that he would never lose. Growing up in a tough environment like the White Room, his heart grew numb until it was something that could not be moved from anything. Plus it was mentioned that Ayanokoji's father and mother both were not overly qualified, so it was not like he had superior genes. The only apparent thing he inherited from his father was his glare and mayhap his ruthlessness, which might have made it easier to adapt to the environment of White Room. Then there is Sakayanagi, who is born with superior genes, with her father being the chairman of the biggest school in Japan and her mother being someone smart enough for Sakayanagi to admire. We haven't seen much of Sakayanagi Ersu's mom, but Mr. Sakayanagi did mention that Ersu was like her mother, and Ersu acted like that was the highest praise she could receive, so yeah, I think she would be the smartest in the family. Now one day the kid Sakayanagi is shown around the White Room by her father like they are visiting a park. I mean, the White Room is a top-secret agency, participating in humane activities to raise kids. I don't think it is very bright of them to allow visitors to bring in their kids. Well, anyway, from the two-way mirror Sakayanagi stares intently at these subjects with poor genes who are being put through tough work to turn them into genius. With the final goal being to create an army of genius. And finds the whole thing kinda interesting, but also a waste of time because it would fail. Her whole only genes decide how smart a person is a logical argument backed up by many interesting papers by psychologists and scientists, but there have also been exceptions. Not getting into that, we see that Mr. Sakayanagi actually feels sympathetic towards the children in the White Room, who are under immense stress, and I am pretty sure Ayanokoji once mentioned that they broke down because they had no one to talk to, so most of them have PTSD. And Mr. Sakayanagi especially feels sympathetic towards Ayanokoji and his peculiar conditions, cause on one hand he has remained in the White Room and hasn't ever experienced familial love. But on the other hand, if Ayanokoji didn't continue to stay in the White Room, to his heartless father he would have been of no value, and he would have probably discarded Ayanokoji away, deeming him insufficient, and go on to have another kid. So him being able to stay in the White Room made him gain his father's favor, but resulted in no family love. And Sakayanagi Ersu, who has turned out the way she is despite growing up in a loving household, I think that speaks to length about her mother's character, also understands her father's feelings. And she too feels bad for the kids, and Ayanokoji has managed to get her attention by displaying his superiority in chess and maybe also some other tests. She, in a way, is thinking of doing a kind things for all the kids by aspiring to beat all the kids and prove that the White Room's project is incapable of providing any results. Since a child with superior genes can beat them anyway, although that would be unlikely since the White Room has managed to produce Kiyotaka. This incident inspired Sakayanagi and made the young her grasp onto a goal. A goal to reach, something to beat backed up by good reasons would motivate any young child. And that became her dream. To defeat the perfect product of the White Room Ayanokoji, and just to do that she even learned chess. And grew up to be obsessed about him. Most likely if they had not met at the school, she would have herself gone over to him as she had hinted previously while talking with Kiyotaka. Then we move into the first chapter where they show a scene that took place before the previous special exam, the class poll. In this scene, Tsukishiro displayed his superiority, talked about how he was different from the previous acting director and how he would bring about changes in this school. Just like this special exam for first year that was very different from all the previous exams. To that, Mishima had some objections. Let me briefly tell you about the standing of the class teachers. The third year and the second year teachers don't seem to care much about the change unless it's extensive. They wouldn't risk their necks just to stand up to Tsukishiro for a bunch of students. Chibayashira is very much caring for her class, a classic tsundere. Hoshinomiya gives Major Kushida vibes, plus it didn't look like she cared much about other students. She resorted to threatening Ayanokoji. Plus she was the one who mentioned to Nagumo about there being special circumstances for Ichinose to be placed in Class B, so rather than say she cares about her student, I would say she cares about winning and doesn't care what happens to the students in the process. And then there is Sakami, who is the only first-year teacher to never get invited out when all the other first-year teachers are hanging out, so I can understand him not caring about the other classes. Mishima on the other hand doesn't like Tsukishiro, and opposes him. The only thing is that he can't really, since he is just a teacher and Tsukishiro is his direct superior. Then the author shows the drama between Chibashira and Hoshinomiya, and we get to know more about the mistake Chibashira-sensei had made in the past. A mistake that caused her class unable to ascend to Class A. And now we know that the mistake had something to do with Chibashira-sensei's first love. Moreover, Hoshinomiya, unlike what she says, is not over that and would go up and under to make sure her class doesn't lose to Chibashira-sensei's. They are shown as rivals that have gradually grown up to be friends. Although the thing to remark here is that, maybe, just maybe, Chibashira's past situation resembles Ichinose's. Moving on, this volume had a lot to offer. We go straight into the day of exam briefing. Chibashira explains the rules of the special exam to a depressed class. And after that, for the first time like a rational person, the class started casting suspicious over Ayanokoji's abilities. Sudo, being the most direct one left, pointed out the absurdity of Ayanokoji placing first, only to be met with Horikita defending him by basically telling the class that he is not capable enough of knowing it himself and basically just more of that. He isn't talented. Why would they cast praise vote on him? And I would have to say plot armor was really thick in this scene, cause although Horikita made some somewhat decent argument, it wasn't convincing. Especially after her saying that Sudo is jealous that she is taking Ayanokoji's side over his. I mean, the man Ayanokoji himself didn't say a single word, and what happened to all those characters being observant about each other's behavior? I mean, when the results were announced, Ayanokoji, according to the novel, closed his eyes and leaned back. That's not a surprised reaction. That's not the face of a man who doesn't understand, and weren't people staring at him while he did that? And why are only stupid people standing up to cast their suspicions on Ayanokoji? I get the dark mood and the friend being lost thing, but still the only people who openly casted their suspicions were Sudo and Shinohara. Even if they are Class D, I think they can do better than that. And Ayanokoji didn't say a single word in his defense until he nominated himself for the position of leadership. And that wasn't even a defense, that was more like a compromise. Anyway, Shinohara was against the decision of Ayanokoji being the leader. Maybe she thought she was being smart when she proposed someone better to be a leader for the class. Of course, Horikita wanted Ayanokoji as the leader and didn't take Shinohara and the other classmates' expectations to be the leader on her shoulders. And people weren't even that suspicious about her denying the position of the leader and letting the leader be a guy she had previously stated as a guy who is quick on his feet. The plot armor was very thick. Anyway, Ayanokoji became the leader for this special exam. Harada left the class because his emo phase couldn't handle such petty peasants. Mi-chan surprisingly felt very deeply towards Harada. I had thought of hers to be a fleeting crush since it was all seemed so flimsy. I mean, Mi-chan started liking him from the first day of the school. But she did in fact feel deeply towards him and was the one who didn't give up until the end, thinking she could still bring back the good old Harada. Now talking about the exam, Ayanokoji's whole point of being the leader was to have a head-on-head challenge with Sakayanagi, and to do that he convinced the other classes to pick each other. Ichinose had planned on facing against Class A, but on his request she decided not to target him while Class D was aiming for Class B. The reason Class D was aiming for Class B was because Hiyori had convinced the people of the class to go for that option because that would be the best for them. While herself not knowing exactly why it would be best for them. She got this piece of information from Ishizaki, who in return had gotten this advice from Ryuuen. After previously being saved by Ayanokoji, Ryuuen had a bit of a change of a heart and decided to get back in the game. And taking a light step towards that, he just casually gave Ishizaki some advice, leaving it up to him whether he would follow or not. Good for the class. Hiyori was smart enough to take the advice and implement step towards it. She even arranged a meeting with Ryuuen and her, Ishizaki and Ibuki in the karaoke. Ryuuen was many hours late, so Hiyori sang some songs while Ibuki grew annoyed. And then Ryuuen finally showed up, a bit too late to be fashionably late. But nonetheless, things started looking good for Class D from there on. Ryuuen was back with his dirty tactics, although his solution to the problem was to cause diarrhea among the opposite class. Funnily enough, it was something Ayanokoji had proposed to do as a joke to Horiki, so it was quite something to see Ryuuen actually carry that plan out. As for Ichinose, who was on the opposite end, I would have to say she let her guard down. Since she is basically the head, and everyone only follows her without even thinking among themselves, the blame of the defeat largely falls on her. Even when the Class D students started acting rude and stalking, then causing stress among her classmates, Ichinose just let them be. Just cause she was too nice to report them. I mean, her different nice approach from the other class is refreshing, but in this case it just came to bite their own ass. At that point, more of their classmates wanted to do something in response, but Ichinose stopped them, saying it would not have much effect since they were officially not breaking any rules. But still, I mean, it's okay to be nice, but that doesn't mean you can't be a snitch. Even after the exam, when they lost horribly due to the tampering done with their food, Ichinose didn't report it to school, and I personally don't think it should have anything to do with kindness. You can still snitch and be kind, especially if there is a lot at stake. Anyways, Ryuuen took a rather simple approach, focusing on events like fighting, which was Class D's specialty, and then they literally beat the crap out of them, rising to Class B in one go. Ichinose was stunned by the turn of the events. She basically lost her spirit the moment she saw him in the control room instead of Kaneda, and from then on until the end of exam, her morale took one brutal hit after another. Then let's talk about the situation of our class. The biggest problem was clearly Harada, and the only one actively taking action towards him was Mi-chan. Kei wanted to take action too, but Harada knew her secret, and the dark emo him didn't look like he would care about exposing it. Horikita, on the other hand, couldn't do anything about him. Being part of the reason the way he had become the way he was, she couldn't do anything. The only time she approached him, she was ignored or turned down. Plus, she didn't want to constantly pester Harada into being nice. She just decided to act like the leader of the class while thinking there was nothing that could be done about Harada. She even said so to Ayanokoji, calling Mi-chan's constant clingy actions to make him change stupid. Fortunately, Ayanokoji didn't think so. He of course had a plan to raise the broken tool that was Harada. Mi-chan's constant pestering worked in his favor, and he quietly bid his time, leaving the job of handling the class with the special exam mainly up to Horikita. He did gather information but didn't need to actively make a major change in the plans and just kinda let things take its course. Of course, he suspected chess being the thing Sakayanagi wanted to directly compete with him. I mean, with her pride, she wouldn't have settled for a roundabout competition between them. She wanted a more direct clash, and the rules of the chess did show that it would be the most direct competition between the commanders. He met up with Horikita once again, falled prey to her. "You ate my food, didn't you?" Strategy. He reviewed her plan and decided to teach her chess. Another thing that came to light when they ate in Horikita's room was that Sudo and her weren't close enough to eat together. Although they had studied together multiple times, she considered the act of making food for Sudo unbelievable, which was, personally, quite a relief, to be honest. I don't ship Sudo and Horikita because God knows Horikita at least deserves better. Speaking of ships, there were hints of a new ship in this volume, when Harada had had enough if Mi-chan and once again rudely told her off, even pushing her. Kuenji came up to her defense. Chivalry is overdosed in Kuenji, and he casually insults Harada and also picks up Mi-chan in her arms and carries her off. Ayanokoji also treats Mi-chan nicely, encourages her and picks up her bag for her, and then we move on to the climax. Sitting in a bench, Ayanokoji and Harada have a talk, and Harada witnesses the terrible dark side and eyes of Ayanokoji. Just like Kei did once. Ayanokoji doesn't try to make things easier for Harada and instead puts responsibilities onto him. Following his general pattern of first breaking the spirit before turning the person into a healthy functional tool. Here we get to know more about Harada's past and the aftermath of his friend trying to commit suicide. Much like 13 Reasons Why, the bullying doesn't really stop there. The group of bully, according to Harada, remained the same and just started looking for another victim. And that was something Harada couldn't stand. He chose the quickest way to stop the bullying by taking action into his own hands. He did employ violence, but he also said more than violence, it was the authority in his voice that worked. Like Harada is very physically fit, but we still don't know how he would fare in an actual fight. But I guess he has to be at least somewhat good in it. Moreover, Harada's character changed very much after his friend was declared brain dead. Before that he was just like any other student and also meeker, and not so charismatic. The transformation from a meek person to an oppressive person really shows how much he must have wanted the circumstances to change. He was dead set on not letting something like before happen again, and to do that he didn't care if his classmates' individuality had to die. As long as there is an audience, people want to gather their attention. The more dramatic something is, the more attention and reaction they get out of the audience, and the thrill is something people enjoy way too much. Harada not only killed the mentality of the people who like to gather attention through drama, he also killed the mentality of the audience. And suddenly things stopped being fun and the heavy weight of their actions began to weigh down on their shoulder. Something Harada had aimed for. The school also took action, which must have happened because of the complaints made, and putted delinquent students into another class. And Harada was the most delinquent student there was at the time. That was why his school must have given him a bad review, hence he was placed in Class D. Ayanokoji heard him from start to end. Harada for the first time told his whole story to someone. He opened his heart to a manipulative sociopath who knew exactly how to respond. Making Harada realize that he could have done better, that now he needs to do better. And another person was added to Ayanokoji's harem. And to be honest, this scene was so heartwarming that I don't even mind this ship. The next day after this, Harada was normal and cherry. He apologized to Horikita, Mi-chan and the whole class. The class morale was seriously boosted and Horikita was once again surprised with Ayanokoji. Then there is another character who wanted to do something major in this exam. Kisei. Honestly speaking, from this volume onwards his character degraded a fair bit. He was impatient with wanting a win. He reminded me much of the old Horikita. He acted exactly like Horikita did in the cruise ship exam. When he talked with Katsuragi he felt like he had achieved something that could possibly lead them to victory. He also wanted to do something about the spy from Class A. This was all still somewhat understandable and Ayanokoji helped him to not get fooled by Katsuragi. Katsuragi on the other hand was still sore cause of Yahiko's expulsion. But he still didn't act up against Sakayanagi Kasu. He was smart enough to understand his position and that he couldn't do much of anything. Sakayanagi on the other hand wanted to take this opportunity to turn him into a full-fledged tool. But Katsuragi was still someone who once lead class A and defense is his forte, so while he could follow orders, he still was strong enough to not let himself fall into despair and let Sakayanagi use him too much. But at least in this volume he still followed her orders but still managed to preserve some of his independence. Sakayanagi in regards to that thought that he would gradually fall over time. Moving on to the thing we had all been waiting for, the competition between the classes began. The commanders were in another room with the teacher of the other two classes, meaning although Sakayanagi was so terribly excited for the match between Ayanokoji, she still had to put on a show for the teachers. And even as he answered questions beyond the standard of a high school student's, Ayanokoji was still self-deprecating for the sake of the teachers. Sakami-sensei was convinced of Ayanokoji's uselessness and even interrupted for his sake when he was allegedly getting destroyed in a verbal argument against Sakayanagi. Hoshimoya-sensei on the other hand had her doubts from the start. Speaking about that, there is a slip-up in the light novel about much the teacher knows. In the cruise ship the first-year teacher knew that Ayanokoji was the one who had replaced Horikita as the leader, so they should have sort of understood that Ayanokoji was the mastermind. I mean, Hoshimoya-sensei even sent Ichinose to spy on her for this purpose. The thing to be noted is that Ayanokoji overheard all of that. Later on the 4.5 volume though, Manabu brings up the subject of Ayanokoji replacing Suzune as the leader and hence he had figured out that Ayanokoji was the mastermind. But in just the next sentence he says that only the student council president knows this, and now Secretary Tachibana, even the teachers don't know about it. But in fact the teachers knew about it, and Ayanokoji who had overheard that fact actually marveled at how the student council knew more than the teachers. So the plot armor is really thick considering all the things the teachers know but still haven't figured out that Ayanokoji is hiding his abilities. Anyway, for Hoshimoya-sensei that secret isn't kept for long. She pays attention to how Ayanokoji answered all the answers correct. He even answered that crazy-ass math problem along with Sakayanagi and Kuenji. Plus with how high-level the chess match was, she figured out Ayanokoji was more than what met eyes. Not creating any pointless suspense, we know that Tsukishiro rigged the whole competition and hence he kept the competition close. He started with basketball, something Class C could win, followed by academical exams that Class A could win, then archery and finally chess. He intentionally kept the competition such that Ayanokoji had no chance to win while making it look like everything was as natural as possible. When the time for chess came, Horikita came in very confidently and it was very sad to see her believe so much in Ayanokoji. Being absolutely certain of her victory only to lose because of the rigged match. It was painful to read. She performed as she had been taught, and managed to gain advantage against Hashimoto. Then Sakayanagi switched in around halftime and she was obviously outmatched. Ayanokoji treated the whole thing very casually, observing for how long Horikita could hold up on her own against Sakayanagi and only switched when she had reached her limit. And then there took place a classic high-level chess match which left the four in audience, 2 teacher and 2 students in awe. The match was somewhat even, having twists in between, but on a crucial moment, Tsukishiro played his hands and the voice transmitted to Horikita contained different instructions from the one Ayanokoji had typed in. Horikita Suzune was very much heartbroken about the lose and couldn't frankly believe it. Sakayanagi was happy for a short time. And Hoshimoya-sensei lightly threatened Ayanokoji before leaving. Alas, Sakayangi's happiness was short-lived, although it is something to consider if she truly felt happy. She was satisfied with this witty game, for sure, but she had expected Ayanokoji, the guy she was obsessed with, to be someone who was beyond her. He was her goal from her childhood, and achieving the goal of beating him maybe too soon must have weighed on her mind. And whatever that happiness or satisfaction Sakayanagi had, Tsukishiro was there to break it. His smug face gave Sakayanagi suspicions, and as if to torture her for turning him down previously regarding Ayanokoji's expulsion, Tsukishiro laid the truth bare. He told her that her victory was fake. And all the dreams she had of this day were ruined by Tsukishiro. She was quite furious and Tsukishiro enjoyed that. After seeing him smugly leave, Sakayanagi calmed down a bit and asked Ayanokoji for a rematch. And Ayanokoji had something interesting to say to that in his monologue. He mentioned the obvious about how if he refused her offer something would break inside Sakayanagi, who had waited for this day for a long-ass time. Moreover, he also said, and something inside me would break as well. So even though he acted like he was calm the whole time, Tsukishiro's interference bothered him too. I mean, in a way that was Ayanokoji's first time experiencing defeat. And although he does desire his defeat, cause that would prove his dad wrong, he doesn't want a defeat like this. Plus about how he had spoken in Volume 7 about how he was scared as a child about losing, until he just understood that he couldn't. If someone like that, who has been made absolutely confident of his victory in all situation, ever experiences true defeat, I rather doubt it would be a good experience. Anyway, they move on to the library, a holy light around them as they sit across each other with the chess board in between them. And they play. And of course this time Ayanokoji wins this time, but he also says they are on par with each other, although I have my suspicions about that, and anybody could win if they did a rematch. But after that they just walk and Sakayanagi accepts her defeat, but not actually. Sakayanagi also wants Ayanokoji to experience the things you could learn from human warmth, and with that wholesome scene the volume ends. And one last thing was concerning Kushida. I mean, if you thought she doesn't partake actively enough in the exams before, then this was taking it to another level. In all the previous exams she hadn't openly participated much, not really offering a new idea, mainly doing things behind the scenes. She didn't even speak during the class discussion, didn't raise the morale of the class like she normally does. The smart thing she did was to become warier towards Ayanokoji, and although her main focus is still on Horikita, she has realized that Ayanokoji is a frightening existence.